guys, Sajidine here, and it's time for another Esports 101 video. It's been over a year now since the last time I made a video like this, but I have gotten a lot of requests from you guys saying make another Esports 101 video, and a lot of people are asking to go over what it's like to become a manager or to be a manager in the esports industry. So I'm going to go over that right now. I have my little slideshow that you see here. I have my notes that I'll probably be taking a peek here and there, and I'm hoping that I can shed some light to what it's like or what it's been like to be a manager in this scene. So in case you guys are not familiar with my background, I have had a lot of experience being a manager in the esports scene. I've done player management, team management. I've been a project manager as well in the esports scene. So I'm going to use those experiences that I have when it comes to talking about what it's like being a manager in the industry. So let's start off with what is a manager in esports. So a manager in the esports industry is going to be the person who's responsible for the day-to-day activities of the players or the team that they manage. They'll be in charge of arranging training, and if there's any business opportunities that are available. If you are a manager that is hired by the organization, then you're probably going to be the middleman in between the heads of the organization and the players that are involved or the talent that are involved. And then your day-to-day activities or your day-to-day tasks are going to vary depending on how involved you are or what workload responsibilities you are given when you are brought on. That involvement is just kind of going to come down to the arrangement that you have between the players or between the org and whatnot. Sometimes you're all over the place, doing a lot of things. And sometimes your workload is going to be a little more specific to certain aspects of what you do. But a manager is going to wear a lot of hats. You're going to be the nanny, you're going to be the counselor, mediator. If people are fighting, you're going to have to cook for them or find them food. You're going to be the Uber Eats of the team. You can be a housekeeper, the travel agent, the nurse, or the doctor if some of them are feeling sick. So it's kind of all over the place depending on what kind of manager you want to be, which I will go over in greater detail in the next slides. Tasks and responsibilities. I kind of put on the screen a quick breakdown of what a day-to-day of a manager can expect. If you are managing a team or certain players that are professionals in the industry, so you're going to be the one responsible for scheduling scrims. Most of the time, there are certain teams that I know, either the captain or a specific player would prefer to be the one in charge of the scrims, but majority of the time, you will be involved in scheduling that. You are also going to be the one who will be the alarm clock, making sure that these players are going to be present and showing up to the scrims and their matches, and making sure that that they're on time and you're not forfeiting the games. Players are going to be 110% focused on playing the game and learning how to get better at the game, and you are the person responsible for everything else, and that includes mealtime, so making sure that they get fed and that they're not just spending the whole day on their computer not eating. You will be the person in charge of arranging travel for your team to and from tournaments or events that they are required to make appearances for. You will have to make sure that their passport and visa requirements, as well as any medical appointments that they need to do, because you do need shots if you're traveling to certain countries, like vaccinations and whatnot. You're the person responsible to make sure that it gets scheduled, it gets done, and that it's done correctly. There's a lot of nuances involved when it comes to scheduling the meal times and arranging travel for your players. You need to make sure that you're not just buying whatever food or booking whatever flights, especially when you're working with tournament organizers on this, because everybody's trying to min-max their finances. So you have to understand, does your player, if your players have any allergies or dietary restrictions, these are things that you need to be aware of when you're getting them meals or when you're arranging travel situations for them. You have a player that's 6'9", and putting him in a regular coach flight is going to be very uncomfortable for him for an 18-hour flight. How many stops are there on the flight, or how long the flight duration is overall? You don't want a tired or a fatigued player arriving at an event because they had a 23-hour flight with 3 layovers because you didn't pay attention to what the flight schedule is going to look like. So these are things that are under your responsibility, and you need to make sure that you're on top of that when you schedule and book these things with the organizers. You'll also be the middleman between your players as well as the media when it comes to scheduling interviews, especially when they're at the event, to make sure that the interviews are with good and reputable journalists, as well as like, you know, canvassing the questions perhaps, or making sure that there's like a proper translator available if you are, or if you have a player that is requiring one. You'll also be the person responsible in finding a proper boot camp situation for them. It's very hard for, you know, teams to make sure that a boot camp is arranged for them if they want one, because they'll be busy doing their scrims or, you know, preparing for the tournament. So you need to make sure that you find and organize an appropriate like boot camp setup for them when that's happening. And if you work under a big org, you are also in charge of doing the finances or the expenses of the team and making sure that you're keeping track and submitting that, you know, properly to your organization and whatnot. There's a whole other list that I haven't even included on these tasks and responsibilities page because it will vary depending on what arrangement or setup you have with the team. Are you guys in a team house right now? Then your responsibilities might also include either cleaning or arranging for cleaning services for the house. Or you could also be in charge of helping or having to do laundry for them if you're on the road and they're in the middle of like matches, but they need their jerseys, you know, clean for the next day. It's just going to come down to trying to figure out what is needed at the time and making sure that those things are taken care of so that the players don't have to worry about it. Be sure to step up if you know that you're needed somewhere, and then at the same time, you know, don't try to do everything under the sun, especially if there's like other people that are responsible for that kind of work in your company. So what actually makes a good manager? I would say that there's two perspectives on this, obviously a subjective versus an objective perspective. I want to say that there are common traits that most good managers share. A lot of them are organized or hyper-organized. They have really, really good time management skills. And another important trait, I think, is both being sensible or reasonable depending on a given situation, which I think that part is going to affect the perspective of the people that you work with. This is kind of where the subjective sense is going to come into play about about what makes a good manager. A lot of times, what makes a good manager will vary depending on whose perspective you are asking. The perspective of a player versus the organization that they work for versus a tournament organizer, as well as the public, can have very conflicting or overlapping perceptions of what makes a good manager. You know, someone who is always making sure that their players' needs are taken care of, number one, could have a really, really good reputation between, you know, like amongst like that player or players. But at the same time, if you're all favoring, say, a certain player over others, then that could create conflicts within the team itself. And then you have to add the other layer of, if you're constantly taking care of the players' needs, but those needs are a conflict to what a team organization wants, then the perspective can kind of shift. And you know, I've personally been in that position before, where an organization is saying like, oh, we need streaming numbers for, you know, our channel, like let's make this happen. But if it's during a tournament, then you're kind of going to have to figure out, well, you know, the players need to be practicing right now, so what do you prioritize, or whose needs do you prioritize? I mean, for that one, that might be a little more obvious for an answer for majority of you, but at the same time, it is a conflict and a nuance of interest because someone's needs is going to be prioritized over the other. Managers can also build a reputation amongst tournament organizers that can make them either easy or difficult to work with depending on certain things such as booking flights or hotel accommodations for the players. Kind of circling back to what I mentioned earlier, when you're in charge of booking, you know, like your players' flights and you're working with a tournament organizer for it, a tournament organizer is working on a budget, and that budget can be stretched thin depending on what sort of flights you are demanding for your players. You know, and trying to find that balance of saying, okay, you know, these are good flights for my players that's not breaking your budget, versus I absolutely insist that my team flies business class and business class only. Those kinds of things are potential pitfalls that could affect how you're seen, you know, amongst tournament organizers, and whether you care about that or not could be up to you. And then it kind of also carries over with the public. The public rarely sees what goes on behind the scenes, so they only actually see whatever is said on Twitter, whatever is taken on like some social media post, whatever is mentioned on like websites like Reddit. So they take what they can, and sometimes, you know, as a manager, you're put in that position of either being thrown under the bus because nobody actually has any idea of what's going on behind the scenes, and you're in a position that you're not either allowed to or should not be talking about those things. And it gets very difficult to stand up for yourself, especially if you are still currently employed by a certain organization or by certain players, that at this point it doesn't do much to help the company or the team internally for you to go out there and defend yourself publicly. And on the flip side, it's also really great if the public can recognize the things that you do and see that, you know, you are a good manager and a good pillar of the community. There are a number of complications and issues that can arise by being a manager in the scene. A very big one that I've kind of touched on already in the last slide is the conflict of interest. Like, who are you really working for? If you were brought on by the team to be the player manager, so you're representing the team, and you suddenly get absorbed by a larger organization, sometimes you're either out of a job because the organization would prefer bringing in their own manager to start managing the team, or if you're not, then you start kind of questioning your position of, are my loyalties to the players or is my loyalty to the org, especially if, depending on what your contract is when you sign with them. You're going to be put in situations where the need of the organization and the need of the players are going to have some conflicts. And then it's up to you to decide how you want to address that. If you can find a way to appease both, then that's perfect and that's great. However, sometimes you're going to have to put your foot down, or you're going to have to bite the bullet as far as having one win out over the other. The prior example that I've given earlier with the streaming obligations is one of them. Another example that I remember having to deal with, and I know other managers have had to deal with as well, is that if, say, the organization is sponsored by a certain peripheral company, but your player can only play with a brand that is in competition with that sponsor, how do you make sure that that player is going to be at their 110% playing with the peripheral that they can play with, and then at the same time not having any branding or sponsor conflicts that are going to be potentially visible to the public or visible to that sponsor? Another potential or inevitable complication you are going to experience as a manager is the burnout. The schedule is very grueling and it's very taxing, not just on your mental state, but as well as on your physical state. You also need to have thick skin, especially if you're working with, you know, certain egos and certain personalities in the industry, either amongst the players that you're working with, or even with the organizations that you're working with, or tournament organizers that you're working with. And at the end of the day, all of that hard work gets little to no appreciation sometimes. And that can also like take a toll on your mental state. So these are things to kind of keep a lookout for, to make sure that at the end of the day, you are also taking some time for yourself to make sure that you take that mental rest and get yourself back to like 110% too. So if everything that I've said so far seems very enticing and hasn't scared you off yet, and you're asking, well, how do I become one? The 100% surefire way to become a manager in the esports industry at the moment is networking. However, it's still very important that you can back that up with some sort of experience. And if you're asking yourself, well, how can I wedge myself into the industry if I either A, don't know anybody, or I know people, but I don't have that experience? A lot of people that have put themselves in their managerial positions, besides knowing the right people, is making sure that like they volunteer themselves and they put themselves out there and say, hey, this is something that I'm interested in doing, and this is something that I know I could be good at, and here's why. And at the same time, you shouldn't be waiting for the right opportunity to fall on your lap. Make it happen. Make those opportunities happen for you. Make sure that you're going to as much events as you can, or being present and active in a lot of like the online events that you're able to do. Spread the word, like reach out, because sometimes all it takes is that one shot for you to make or break yourself in the scene. So I hope this video was insightful and gave you guys a good idea of what it's like to be a manager in the esports scene. Let me know what you guys think about the video in the comments down below, and I will see you guys for the next one. Let me know if you guys have anything in particular that you want me to cover. Otherwise, I think I might do either what it's like being a tournament organizer or what it's like to own an esports team. Until next time.